Ready to ditch autopilot and finally meet your true self.
Oh, I like that.
Well, you came to the right place because today
Yes.
we're diving deep into How to Meet Yourself by Dr. Nicole LePera.
Great book.
She's this amazing holistic psychologist, and she actually created the whole hashtag self-healers movement.
Yeah.
A totally new approach to therapy.
It's fascinating. What I think is so interesting about this book is that Dr. LePera takes us on a journey through 4 sections.
Okay.
Each one peeling back a layer to help you understand and connect with your authentic self.
So let's jump right into the book.
Let's do it.
Starting with the first 2 sections, how we meet ourselves and meet your habit self.
Okay.
So Dr. LePera starts off with this pretty powerful idea that most of us are living on autopilot,
Yeah.
just running on habits and conditioning instead of conscious choices.
Right. It's like our brains are wired to create these shortcuts based on our experiences, which, makes sense for efficiency, but sometimes those shortcuts, they lead us down paths that no longer serve us.
And get this, Dr. LePera had her own wake-up call.
Oh.
She went through this crazy health crisis, like memory issues, digestive problems. She even had fainting spells.
Wow.
And it was all before she realized that she was totally on autopilot.
Yeah.
Which makes me think, what will our wake-up call be?
That's such an important question. I mean, are there any, subtle signs or symptoms that you've been brushing off? I think Dr. LePera offers some simple yet powerful tools to start tuning in, like the balanced breathing and the 4-7-8 breathing techniques.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever tried those?
I've dabbled in a little 4-7-8 before bed sometimes.
Yeah.
But I've never really thought about it as a way to break free from autopilot.
Right. Right.
She also talks about grounding techniques like connecting with your senses and even standing barefoot on the earth.
Yeah, all of those techniques are about bringing you into the present moment, which is so crucial for snapping out of that autopilot state.
Right.
And becoming aware of your habit self.
Okay.
Which is all those ingrained patterns of thinking and behaving that Dr. LePera says are basically running the show.
It's like we're puppets and our habits are the strings.
Totally, yeah.
And here's where it gets a little scary.
Oh.
She talks about dissociation, which is basically checking out mentally from our bodies.
Mm-hmm.
And she connects it to our modern obsession with digital distractions.
Oh, wow.
So all that mindless scrolling on your phone could actually be a form of dissociation.
It's so true. And I think that dissociation is often a way of coping with discomfort, what Dr. LePera calls body unsafety.
Interesting.
And in today's world, I mean, we have so many opportunities to escape into those distractions.
Yeah.
It's pretty crazy when you think about it.
To help us snap out of it, Dr. LePera introduces this tool called the Daily Consciousness Check-In.
Okay.
It sounds pretty simple.
Mm-hmm.
Throughout the day, you just pause and notice what you're doing and where your attention is.
Sounds easy enough, but I bet it's a little more challenging than it seems. What stands out to you about this technique?
Well, for me, I think it highlights how much of our day we spend on autopilot.
Yeah.
Totally unaware of our actions and our thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. LePera emphasizes that there's no judgment involved in this exercise.
Good.
It's simply about observation. But she also acknowledges that discomfort is normal.
Yeah.
So especially when you're trying to change deeply ingrained habits.
That's so important. I think, we often resist change because it feels uncomfortable.
Totally.
But what if we could reframe that discomfort as a sign of growth?
I love that. It's like leaning into the discomfort instead of running away from it.
Exactly. Now, let's move on to section 3.
Okay.
Body beliefs.
Body beliefs.
Where Dr. LePera explains how our beliefs about our bodies are formed by all sorts of messages we receive throughout our lives.
Okay.
From childhood experiences to media influences.
So interesting. And get this. She categorizes these beliefs into 5 self-care styles. Neglectful or absent, indulgent, disciplined, chaotic, and balanced.
Wow.
It's amazing how much our early experiences with self-care shape how we view and treat our bodies as adults.
It's about those underlying messages we've internalized.
Right.
If self-care was always about restriction or punishment growing up,
Oh, yeah.
you might have a very different relationship with your body than someone whose experience of self-care was about nurturing and pleasure.
That's such a good point. And speaking of body image, Dr. LePera points out something I never really considered before.
What's that?
Our body language.
Ah, yes. Think about it. The way we carry ourselves, how we take up space, even our eye contact.
Right.
It can reveal so much about our subconscious beliefs about our bodies.
Someone who's constantly hunching over, trying to make themselves small. But what does that say about their inner world?
Exactly. It's like our bodies are constantly communicating even when we're not aware of it.
Hmm.
So paying attention to your body language can be a really powerful way to uncover those hidden beliefs.
This definitely food for thought. All right, let's move on to section 4, the emotional landscape.
This is where things get really interesting. Dr. LePera starts by talking about the conditioned mind
Okay.
and how our core beliefs are shaped by early experiences, creating a filter through which we view the world.
Okay.
And then our ego steps in, that inner voice that's always trying to confirm our existing beliefs.
Yeah.
Even if they're not serving us.
It's like our ego is trying to protect us from getting hurt
Yeah.
by reinforcing those familiar stories. But sometimes those stories are holding us back from experiencing true joy and fulfillment.
Right.
And she uses a great example to illustrate this. Dating. Imagine you have this belief that you're not worthy of love.
Okay.
So when someone doesn't text back right away, your ego jumps in with all those familiar stories.
Yeah.
They're not interested. I messed it up. I'm not good enough.
Oh, yeah. I know those stories.
It's familiar.
Absolutely. We all have those ego-driven stories that play on repeat in our minds. But here's the key. Dr. LePera doesn't see the ego as the enemy.
Oh, interesting.
It's simply a part of us that needs to be understood and managed.
So how do we manage those ego stories? How do we stop them from running the show?
Well, that's where self-awareness comes in.
Okay.
By becoming aware of those stories,
Right.
we can start to challenge them and choose different, more empowering narratives.
And she gives us some fantastic tools for doing just that, like the 7 inner child archetypes.
Yes. Think of these archetypes as different aspects of your younger self that are still influencing your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors today. We've got the people pleaser, the rebel, the caretaker, the inner critic. Which one resonates with you?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think I see a little bit of the overachiever in myself.
Oh, yeah.
But before we get too lost in self-reflection,
Okay.
I have to share this fact that totally blew my mind. The 90-second rule of emotions.
Ooh, tell me more.
Dr. LePera says that, physiologically speaking, emotions only last about 90 seconds.
Really? So it's our thoughts about those emotions that keep them going.
Yes.
Sometimes for hours, days, even years.
Exactly.
So if we can learn to let go of those thoughts, we can let go of the emotion much faster.
That's a game changer. But how do we actually do that?
That's a great question, and it's something we'll dive into further in the next part of our deep dive. But for now, I want to leave you with this thought.
Okay.
What if you had the power to choose how long you stay with an emotion?
I like that.
What if you could let it pass through you like a wave instead of getting swept away by it?
That's a powerful image, and it's something to really ponder as we continue exploring Dr. LePera's work. But before we move on, I'm curious.
Yeah.
Which of these concepts has resonated with you the most so far?
For me, I think it's the idea of the habit self and how much of our lives we spend on autopilot.
Yeah,
It's just a wake-up call to become more conscious and intentional in our thoughts and actions.
I agree. And it makes me excited to explore the tools and techniques that Dr. LePera offers for breaking free from those unconscious patterns and stepping into our authentic selves. So stay tuned for part 2 of our deep dive into how to meet yourself.
Welcome back. Last time we were talking about those sneaky emotional patterns that can keep us stuck. Dr. LePera gives us a whole new way to look at them in section 5,
Okay.
reframing and rewiring.
That sounds hopeful.
Yeah.
But she starts off by talking about our brain's negativity bias,
Right.
which doesn't sound so positive.
Right, but it makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint. I mean,
Yeah.
our ancestors needed to be like hyper aware of threats to survive.
Right.
But now our brains are constantly scanning for danger,
Yeah.
even when there isn't any real threat present.
So how do we break free from this like doom and gloom thinking? I know a lot of people who are struggling with anxiety these days.
Yeah.
It's a lot.
That's where those empowering belief reframes come in.
Okay.
Dr. LePera says we can actually rewire our brains to focus on the positive,
Okay.
even if it feels unnatural at first.
She uses a really powerful example in the book.
Yeah.
It's about someone who believed people are always out to hurt me.
Yeah.
And they shifted their perspective by reframing it to, I have control over how I treat myself.
Interesting.
focusing on what they could actually influence.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's so important to remember that we have a choice
Right.
in how we interpret our experiences.
Yeah.
We can choose to see the world as like a threatening place, or we can choose to see the good, the beauty, and the possibilities that surround us.
What do you think?
Well, I think it's easy to get stuck in those negative thought patterns
Totally.
without even realizing it.
That's why I love these practical tools that Dr. LePera gives us.
Yeah.
Like the stress ladder and the window of tolerance.
Right. The stress ladder is a great way to like visualize how our bodies escalate in response to stress. We can start to notice those early signs, like a clenched jaw
Oh, yeah.
or a racing heart,
Yeah.
before we reach the top rung and completely lose it.
And the window of tolerance is like that sweet spot where we're able to handle challenges
Yes.
without getting overwhelmed.
Yeah, when we're outside that window,
Right.
we're either in fight or flight mode or completely shut down. And that's when those unhealthy coping mechanisms tend to kick in.
Exactly.
So the key is learning how to stay within that window.
Right.
And Dr. LePera provides a ton of techniques for doing just that.
Have you ever noticed yourself going outside that window?
Oh, absolutely, especially when I'm feeling stressed
Yeah.
or overwhelmed.
That's why I love that 90-second rule
Yes.
we talked about earlier. Just knowing that the physical sensation of an emotion only lasts about 90 seconds.
Right.
Helps me to ride the wave
Yeah.
instead of getting swept away.
It's about separating the initial feeling from all the thoughts and stories
Yeah.
we layer on top of it. And when we can do that,
Right.
we create space for a more mindful and compassionate response.
It's like we become the observer of our emotions.
Yes.
Instead of getting completely consumed by them.
No, Dr. LePera doesn't just focus on individual emotional regulation.
Oh.
She also emphasizes the importance of co-regulation,
Yeah.
connecting with safe and supportive people
Right.
to help calm our nervous systems.
That makes so much sense.
Yeah.
We're not meant to do this work alone.
No.
Having a therapist, a close friend, even a pet
Right?
can help us regulate those intense emotions.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that we're wired for connection, and that connection can be incredibly healing.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about like the inner work involved in meeting our authentic selves. But what about the outer expression?
Right.
How does that play into it?
That's where Section 6, Authenticity and Boundaries, comes in.
Okay.
Dr. LePera explains how our authentic selves are often hidden beneath layers of conditioning,
Yeah.
fear of judgment, and people-pleasing.
It's like we've built these walls to protect ourselves,
Yeah.
but those walls can also prevent us from expressing who we really are.
Exactly. And she talks about flow state,
Okay.
that feeling of being totally absorbed in something you love, as a sign that you're in alignment with your true self.
Yeah.
Think about those times when you lose track of time.
Oh, yeah.
Because you're so engaged in what you're doing.
Oh, I love that feeling.
Right. It's like being completely in the zone.
Yes.
And it feels amazing.
It feels amazing.
It's a powerful indicator that you're tapping into your authentic self.
I agree.
Dr. LePera encourages us to find more opportunities for flow in our lives.
Okay.
Whether it's through creative pursuits, hobbies, or even just spending time in nature. What are some things that bring you into that flow state?
For me, it's definitely writing, dancing, and spending time outdoors.
Oh, nice.
When I'm doing those things, I feel completely present and alive.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
And it's a reminder that our authentic selves are often waiting for us.
In the things that bring us joy
Yeah.
and make us feel truly alive. But sometimes those walls we've built up can get in the way.
That's where boundaries come in, right?
Exactly.
Like they help us to create the space to be ourselves without fear of judgment or rejection.
Dr. LePera emphasizes the importance of knowing our values.
Okay.
Those guiding principles that help us make choices aligned with our true selves. She even provides a long list of values in the book to help us identify our own.
What are some values that resonate with you?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Honesty, authenticity, and connection are really important to me.
Yeah, but setting boundaries can be tough, especially when it comes to people we love.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
It can feel uncomfortable at first.
Yeah.
But Dr. LePera provides us with some super helpful scripts for setting those boundaries, even in challenging situations.
Like how to say no.
Right. Remember, setting boundaries is not about being mean or selfish.
Yeah.
It's about honoring your own needs and communicating them clearly and respectfully.
I think one of the biggest challenges for me is distinguishing between healthy boundaries and just pushing people away.
Right.
How do we find that balance?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
It's about learning to tune into your intuition
Okay.
and figuring out what feels right for you.
Okay.
Dr. LePera breaks down 3 boundary styles:
Okay.
rigid, loose, and flexible.
Okay.
It's about finding that sweet spot
Mm-hmm.
between being overly rigid
Yeah.
and having no boundaries at all.
She also talks about different types of boundary.
Yes.
Not just like physical space.
Right.
There are also mental and emotional boundaries,
Mhm.
and even resource boundaries,
Yes.
which I've never really thought about before.
Resource boundaries are about protecting our time and energy.
Okay.
It's saying no to things that drain us,
Mm.
even if they seem like good things to do.
Yeah. It's about recognizing that we have a limited amount of energy,
Right.
and we need to be mindful of how we spend it.
That's such a helpful concept.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people struggle with saying no, especially women.
Mm-hmm.
We're often conditioned to be people pleasers.
Right.
But Dr. LePera reminds us that it's okay to prioritize our own needs.
Absolutely. Saying no to something that doesn't align with your values or your needs
Mm,
frees up space for things that do.
yes.
And that's where the magic happens.
Right.
When we start to live in alignment with
Mhm.
our authentic selves.
This is all starting to connect now.
I know, right?
Like, by understanding our autopilot tendencies, our habit selves,
Mhm.
and our body beliefs, we start to see how we've been conditioned to hide our true self.
It's true.
And then through emotional regulation,
Right.
cultivating flow,
Yes.
and setting healthy boundaries,
It all comes
you
together.
create space for our authentic selves to emerge.
It's a journey of uncovering
Mhm.
layer by layer. And Dr. LePera reminds us that it's not always easy or comfortable,
Yeah.
but the rewards are immense.
What resonates with you about this idea?
For me, it's the reminder that this is a process,
Mm-hmm.
not a destination. We're
Mhm.
always evolving and growing.
Right.
And there's no perfect way to be ourselves.
Totally.
It's about embracing the journey and being kind to ourselves along the way.
And that's where self-compassion comes in,
Yes.
which is one of Dr. LePera's core teachings.
Absolutely.
We've touched on it throughout our conversation,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm excited to dive deeper into this concept in the next part of our deep dive. Welcome back to our deep dive into Dr. LePera's How to Meet Yourself.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey.
We've been talking about uncovering those layers of conditioning
Right.
and creating space for our authentic selves to emerge.
And a crucial aspect of that is cultivating self-compassion,
Yes.
which is where Dr. LePera really shines.
Right.
It's about treating ourselves with the same kindness and understanding we would offer a close friend, especially when we're struggling.
Yeah.
Or making mistakes.
I think that's something so many of us struggle with.
Oh, for sure.
We're often our own worst critics.
Absolutely.
Dr. LePera even talks about this inner critic voice and how to start challenging those negative thought patterns.
Right. She encourages us to become aware of that inner critic.
Yeah.
Notice when it's speaking.
Right.
And to start questioning its validity.
Oh, interesting.
Like, are those criticisms actually true?
Right.
Are they helpful?
Mhm.
Or are they just echoes of old messages that no longer serve us?
She provides some really powerful exercises for cultivating self-compassion,
Oh, yeah. Like what?
like writing ourselves a letter of support
Okay.
or practicing self-soothing touch.
Interesting.
It's about creating that inner sanctuary where we can always return to find comfort and reassurance.
And remember that self-compassion isn't just about being kind to ourselves when we mess up.
Right.
It's also about celebrating our wins,
Yes.
big or small, and acknowledging our own strengths and accomplishments.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's like giving ourselves permission to feel good about ourselves, which could be a radical act in a world that often tells us to be humble
Right.
and downplay our achievements.
Self-compassion is about recognizing that we're worthy of love and acceptance.
Yes.
Just as we are
Right.
imperfections and all.
Such a powerful concept.
Yeah.
And I think it's essential for anyone on a journey of self-discovery.
Absolutely.
Because when we can accept ourselves fully,
Mhm.
it becomes so much easier to show up authentically in the world.
Absolutely.
And that authenticity can transform our relationships.
It can.
Dr. LePera emphasizes the importance of interdependence,
Yeah.
that healthy balance between our individual needs and our connection to others.
Right. It's not about losing ourselves in relationships.
Right.
Or isolating ourselves completely.
So it's about finding that sweet spot
Yes.
between being completely independent
Mm-hmm.
and overly dependent on others. I know a lot of people struggle with that balance.
Yeah, me too.
They're either afraid of getting too close
Right.
or they lose themselves completely in their relationships.
Dr. LePera provides a helpful checklist for assessing our level of self-connection,
Oh, that's good.
which is key because, as we talked about earlier,
Hmm.
our relationship with ourselves impacts all our other relationships.
It's like that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup.
Right.
If we're not taking care of ourselves, meeting our own needs,
Mm-hmm.
and honoring our own values, it's impossible to show up fully and authentically in our relationships.
Exactly.
And speaking of honoring our needs,
Yes.
Dr. LePera dives deep into the topic of boundaries,
Oh, yes. Boundaries.
as you know,
So important.
are essential for healthy relationships.
We touched on this in the last part,
Yeah.
but I'm curious to hear more about how self-compassion plays into setting boundaries.
Well, when we're compassionate with ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
we're more likely to recognize our own needs and limits.
Yes.
We're less likely to overextend ourselves or allow others to take advantage of us.
And we're more likely to set those boundaries with kindness and clarity
Yes.
rather than anger or resentment.
Exactly.
Dr. LePera emphasizes the importance of communicating our boundaries clearly and assertively.
Hmm.
And she provides some really helpful scripts for different situations, like dealing with a pushy friend
Okay.
or a family member who's constantly overstepping.
I think one of the most valuable things I've learned from Dr. LePera
Yeah.
is that setting boundaries isn't selfish.
Right.
It's actually an act of self-care.
It is.
It's about protecting our own well-being so we can show up as our best selves in our relationships.
It's also about teaching others how we want to be treated
Right.
when we set clear boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
We're modeling healthy behavior
Yeah.
and inviting others to do the same.
This deep dive has been such an incredible journey.
It has.
We've covered so much ground, from understanding our conditioned minds to cultivating self-compassion and setting healthy boundaries.
And through it all,
Right.
Dr. LePera emphasizes that meeting our authentic selves is a lifelong process. There's no finish line,
Yeah.
no point at which we suddenly become perfect or fully self-actualized.
It's about embracing the journey, the ups and downs,
Yeah.
the challenges and triumphs,
Mm-hmm.
and recognizing that each step we take towards self-discovery is a victory in itself.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into how to meet yourself,
Yes.
we want to leave you with this final thought.
Okay.
The most important relationship you'll ever have is the one you have with yourself.
It's so true.
Nurture that relationship with kindness, curiosity, and compassion.
Yes.
And trust that as you continue to explore and discover your authentic self,
Mm-hmm.
you'll unlock a world of possibilities.
Thanks for joining us.